Recording on. Hello, everyone. Just waiting for your lovely faces to come up.
We want to see you.
Yeah, we want to, cameras on.
If you want to be seen.
Depends on where you are. Hi, Luke. Okay, so
hello, everyone.
Hi. It'd be great for everyone to have their cameras on, if possible. And Anthony, I can see you there. You're just joining, but we'll start because we'll run out of time otherwise. So let's kick off. So thanks everyone. Welcome to our short webinar. This 45-minute webinar will provide an overview of our findings from a short survey carried out in September last year. And what did we find out? Well, is sustainability a priority for consumers? Will people ever use shared spaces again? Does quality of life depend on better technology solutions? Well, we're just going to give you a taste of what we found out and how we think, based on our findings, the pandemic will shape and will continue to shape consumer preferences. We invite you to read our full report, and we'll provide our contact details right at the end of the presentation so you can get in touch to get a full copy. So the way today is going to be structured, we're going to give a quick introduction, 5 minutes, just to introduce participants, go through our survey results, and Stuart and I will be presenting our survey results for around 10 minutes. Then we'll invite reflections from Rich Radka and Nikki Osborne, who I will introduce in a few minutes. We'll have a discussion amongst the four of us and then invite Q&A. It's a relatively small group of people on the call today, so actually we might just open it up for kind of more general discussion and Q&A so that we can have a good chat, and we'd really love your feedback and insight based on what you think and see is happening. So last year, Human City Infused Foresight surveyed a random sample of 400 people living and working in the UK to find out whether recent trends would continue or take a new course due to circumstances brought about by the pandemic. Our starting assumption was that trends such as well-being would be heightened, whereas others such as sustainability we could see being diminished. And this short webinar will introduce the main findings of our trends report, and there's 2 guest speakers. So the guest speakers we have on the call today: Rich Radka, founder of Fuse Foresight, got 20 years experience of providing deep human insights into corporate and scale up and public sector clients. Rich works with companies to feed inputs for innovators, consumer experience development and critical business decisions. He's recently launched Where To From Here, a company designed for the emerging new economy, which helps businesses to design new futures, introduce new thinking, create new propositions, build new leadership capability, develop new collaborative ways of working to deliver innovative, transformative, and enhanced results. Emphasis on new there. Nikki Osborne, creative director at Basher Franklin. She's a highly experienced creative designer working within the built environment industry. Nikki has worked with a broad range of leading global clients to deliver innovative design solutions across all media and industry sectors. She's a strong strategist with a natural flair for understanding clients' business needs and pushes boundaries to ensure the creation of workplace environments or workspaces that support future organizational aspirations and enhance the experience of those in the workplace. And as I said, after our discussion, we'll encourage you to ask questions and participate in the interactive session on important themes that we're going to address. So what themes are we going to address? So we really were thinking about, we chose 5 themes, so 5 overarching themes that we think have recently influenced consumer preferences: well-being, identity, experience, technology, and sustainability. And we really wanted to know to what extent these themes and people's preferences in relation to these themes had shifted, or whether there was a continuity post-pandemic with regard to people's behaviours around these themes. So as I said, we made some assumptions and a hypothesis at the outset as to the fact that well-being we thought would be amplified and further enhanced and accelerated, but potentially sustainability would be reduced in importance. So let's dig into this in a little bit more detail. In the next few slides, we'll address each of these themes in turn, Stuart starting off and me taking over for the last 3 themes. So Stuart, next slide, is going to tackle experience and identity.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Gemma. Yeah, the first theme we looked at, one of the main themes that we dug into was experience. This is quite a broad topic, obviously, and we asked a number of different questions. I guess, in today's experience economy, of course, moments matter, because we are increasingly spending money on doing things rather than buying things. And we're all stuck at home and we're looking to experience more than we can. So we asked participants whether they were staying close to home, whether they were prioritizing local community, and whether they were avoiding public spaces. Some of the quotes that we got back from our participants, one of which was, I think everyone has gone back to basics, and I think everyone is enjoying it. Wholesome family time, quality time, doing things we took for granted for such a long time. And again, I'm a lot happier working from home. It allows me to have a perfect balance between work and life. And those are just a couple of the quotes that we received. And just looking into some of the themes and some of the questions that we looked into. So one of the questions we asked was about an interest in sharing. Broadly speaking, co-living, co-working spaces, ride-sharing services, public transport, they've all been hit hard by the pandemic. More people are remote working from home. There's been less demand for city centre living and working spaces and a decline in passenger numbers. So we were thinking we can expect this trend to continue forward in the medium term. At least this is what our survey indicated. However, people will continue to be drawn to the attractiveness of cosmopolitan urban areas, of course. Younger people in particular have a tendency to migrate to urban areas and to live in different cities. And I think we can see that trend already. London's opening back up again. Some of the major metropolitan areas are opening up again. People are moving back in after the empty spaces that we all saw widely on the news. And I guess connected to this, this kind of reduced interest in sharing, there's more of a disconnected workforce. The majority of people have been working from home since the coronavirus outbreak. There are potential downsides for Gen Z, of course, including isolation, lack of opportunities for networking, relationship building, knowledge transfer. The pandemic, we thought, would likely increase, will likely cause businesses to rethink the need for travel to meetings, conferences, but also employee experiences and well-being. So maybe workplace travel will become more purposeful. We're not just going to fly to New York on a moment's notice to take a business meeting like we might have done in the past. Employers may maintain some fixed points in the week, but enable staff to perform the majority of their tasks at home. And then again, of course, there's a shift to buying locally. We've all seen this. Consumers are increasingly buying local brands and local services from firms that are negatively affected by the lockdown restrictions. So those are some of the main themes that arose from our first main topic of experience, and how they will likely affect Gen Z in the future. Our second theme that we looked at was identity. Now, of course, identity is quite a broad theme. People are highly attuned to how their behavior and choices can either bolster their identity or betray the group in which they belong to. And it's particularly important to younger customers, of course. They guide our decisions at any given moment and the kinds of products and services that we buy. So we asked participants whether the pandemic had affected whom people associate with, whether consumers are turning more and more to the brands that they can really trust. And some of the quotes that we received from our respondents: I'm putting myself first. I'm not doing anything I don't want to do. And I'm working my normal hours, no extra shifts. I'm looking out for number one. So there's obviously more of a, bringing it back home to looking after the self as number one. Some of the themes that emerged and some of the questions that we asked, there's going to be a new hyper-individualism, the survey indicated. Linked to the previous insight and experience, consumers increasingly buy, use brands that reflect their lifestyle and values. This hyper-individualization points to brands becoming extensions of the self to express and affirm identity against other lifestyles and values. And of course, we've seen this in other economic crises. In periods of crisis and anxiety, these sentiments intensify as as individuals retreat to these core values and mindsets. Gen Z, of course, are at the forefront of the shifts. With declining trust in traditional institutions, young people today are increasingly using brands and consumption to express their identity and signal their values. And tied to this, of course, there's been an emerging ethical consumerism. This was one of the second shifts that we kind of pulled out from the data. It's difficult to predict whether the recent demonstration of ethical consumerism, of course, will continue in the future, and what new habits will later disappear. However, for now, companies would do well, we feel, to show authentic and long-term commitment to being brands that care, that are on the side of communities. It presents, of course, the crisis, both an opportunity and a challenge for brands. And the so what of this, the way companies are seen to act during this time, of course, may lead to long-term customer retention, or conversely, long-term shunning. And then tied to this, we find there's almost like a growing mistrust of others who don't share our values and outlook. This is tied to the fact that we are spending more time with the people that we, are close friends and family. And that kind of is like a natural outlook from that. And I think that brings us on to our next theme, which Gemma is going to tackle, sustainability.
Yes, indeed. So I'm going to talk about sustainability, wellbeing and technology. And actually, just to comment before I go into those three, that actually I think they're intrinsically linked. From my perspective, in the work I do in the real estate industry, actually sustainability is becoming increasingly important for the built environment profession, particularly in a post-COVID climate. How we design experiences and spaces to address environmental, economic and social impact has become increasingly key to design decisions. And of course, well-being is a key component of that, actually thinking about social impact and well-being of consumers in the context of sustainability. And of course, then technology, how technology can drive change, but also enable sustainability in different kinds of ways. So our thinking, my interest in this report is, do consumers agree? So while businesses think sustainability, wellbeing technology is enabling certain ways of placemaking, do consumers also hold sustainability as a priority? So let's go on to sustainability and have a look. So we asked participants whether the pandemic had affected their views on sustainability, whether they were more or less keen to use brands with strong sustainability credentials, and whether saving the planet was more important than the price of goods. And the overall feedback we got was, quote, "I'm more conscientious or conscious of my impact on the environment. However, I'm still trying to maintain my social life." So it's very much a balance when it comes to consuming. Actually, it's really important for consumers to feel that they have the ability and flexibility that they previously had, but while also thinking potentially of their impact as they go about their daily lives. Another quote is, "We're wasting a lot less food as we don't want to go out as a result of lockdown." So actually lockdown led to more sustainable practices, and actually consumers began to realize that and considered how they might incorporate those new practices into their life moving forward out of the pandemic. But what we saw was, rather than a prioritization of sustainability, there was increased demand for functionality. Actually, the way consumers were talking, or the people we surveyed were talking about desirability, was in terms of the functionality of goods and services. And actually, how do these goods and services meet their specific needs? And of course, in the context of a pandemic, it was health needs. So there's increased prioritization of functionality when it comes to consumer decisions. We've also seen an increased emphasis on affordability. As we know, under lockdown, there was increased unemployment, many people struggling day to day, even though on the one hand there was a lot of saving going on the other hand, people were in increased financial precarity. And of course, affordability began to become more of a priority than sustainability. So we've got, on the one hand, functionality, affordability being more of a priority than sustainability. But on the other hand, you have Gen Z, who obviously are your 16 to 24-year-olds, who are those ethical consumers that Stu mentioned earlier. Actually, there's increased prioritization of a sustainable way of life. So I guess the challenge for businesses is how to balance those quite disparate needs and how to remain a sustainable organization while meeting consumer demand for functionality and affordability. Next slide. So we also saw, obviously, in a post-COVID environment, and obviously, you know, we're not even post-COVID yet, so this is looking quite far ahead. Health and well-being is going to be an increased priority for consumers. What that means is thinking about health, fitness, preventative health, self-improvement. All of these have become part of the quote new normal. I'm sure all of us have seen people taking up jogging under lockdown. Suddenly, you know, there's increased emphasis on keeping well and healthy. So there's an growing interest in self-care. But what's, you know, potentially more interesting is also there's a growing interest in quality of life, and this is going to fundamentally shift potentially where people will choose to live and how they choose to work. So there's been a widespread shift in thinking about quality of life. Potentially quality of life is more important than someone's job. So actually thinking or re-evaluating career goals based on more quality of life aspirations. So what's an interesting statistic, particularly for the world of work, is 76% of our respondents agreed positively, from strongly agree to somewhat agree, with the statement that quality of life has become more important to them versus their jobs. And this is only increased in the age group 16 to 24-year-olds. So of course that you know, I've mentioned you know, the workplace and the future of the workplace. Actually, businesses have to find ways to support consumers in their pursuit of a more purposeful life, helping them to navigate uncertainty as we emerge from the pandemic. Next slide. So technology, how has that played a role in people's lives? You know, obviously we're all working remotely, and so technology for us has become integral to the way in which we learn, work and socialize, all at a distance from physical spaces. But also technology has enabled health and safety measures to be in place actually in physical locations. There's more of an emphasis on touchless technology, and as we know, as new spaces are now being brought forward for development, and products and services that are touchless are much more attractive than obviously the old school, you know, touch orientated technology. So we can expect the pandemic to drive an acceleration of online services, and particularly amongst Gen Z, towards delivery services with a digital front. So actually places, spaces, products and services that actually have a strong digital presence, a strong social media presence with a digital focus. And that will enable a blended approach to socializing, working and learning in the future. And even before this call, we were just talking about whether we thought this would continue in the future. And actually we agreed that amongst ourselves, we probably would be still talking online. So quote, people say, I prefer shopping online. I don't like queuing to enter a shop. So actually, you know, the tolerance for queuing has declined. Others talking about healthcare services have been interacting with their doctor online and will hope to continue to do so in the future. So companies will have to think about digitalizing services across all sectors. They have to think about creating experiences that combine the benefits of digital and physical moving forward. Next slide. So we're now going to spend some time discussing some of these points. And I'd like to reintroduce one of the speakers, Rich Radke, who will hopefully share his thoughts for the next 5 minutes on the report, but also integrate and weave in some of the work that he's been doing more recently at Fuse Foresight and beyond.
Thanks, Gemma. And I've recently been conducting global conversations with 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK, the EU, the US, and Latin America to understand what expectations and traits Gen Z will be bringing as the next wave of consumers and employees. And of course, our COVID year has been a big part of those conversations, as you imagine. So I think first thing that comes to mind is we can't think about this COVID year in purely functional terms. It's not over. It will never be over. It's just going to be another layer to that liminal space between our interior lives and the external world. So the biggest impacts are going to be emotional and attitudinal. How will this fundamentally reshape subcultures, generational cohorts, and the tribes that we're part of? So, you know, if you can imagine being 18 years old and you had planned to start university last year, and that simply didn't happen, how does that rewrite your view of the world? and your life ahead, your expectations. That's something that doesn't just go away with a vaccine. So, these expectations of future volatility, more black swans that are going to come anytime and from any unexpected direction, what does this do to people's psyches, especially those who are coming online as conscious individuals, developmental 8 years old, for example, who are really coming onto themselves as human beings, or those preparing to launch out of the home, 16 to 24, for example. So I'd like to reflect a little bit on those areas of experience, identity, and well-being, as I think those points lead to opportunity to better serve existing needs, as well as to serve some emerging needs that are not quite defined yet. So around experience, I think there's this tension of optimization versus reductive or diminished experience. So I want to think about that as like a lot of people have talked about optimizing themselves, making the best of the situation. But the tension there is often what they're really hiding is a reduced experience. Because we're not machines. We're not about optimization. We're human beings who need richness of experience. So I would say, first thing, how can we re-inject some richness back into people's lives? And one experience that kind of comes along with that, talking to a lot of these Gen Z folks, it's amazing how many of them said almost the same words. I wake up 1 minute before my first class. It's incredible to me. No breakfast, no shower, no toothbrush, no transition. They just sit up in bed, they look at their phone, flip open their laptop, which is already on the bed from the night before, connect, and they're going. So first impression is, this is terrible. How can they do this? But then on second thought, I took this thought about, teenagers are habitually sleep deprived. So maybe this is not completely a negative. Maybe they're getting the kind of sleep they have not had through their adolescent lives so far. So maybe we need to rethink some of our assumptions around these kinds of observations and kind of check ourselves a little bit and try to understand what else that can be there. And then under identity, I think Stu already mentioned this, younger millennials and Gen Zs have a strong sense of self-sufficiency. It's part of their core identity. It's a point of pride, but it's also a common response, a common sense response to the world that they've inherited. Nobody's got their backs. They can't trust institutions and brands. They're on their own. But during the isolation of COVID, while many have also found an unexpected resilience inside themselves to get through this, they've described feeling lost, feeling detached from their tribes. And this has really shaken their core belief about just how self-sufficient they really are. Is this a reality for the generation, or is it a bit of a mythology they tell themselves? And then around well-being, besides the fact that I just read something a couple of days ago that at least in the US, during lockdown, the average American gained 2 pounds per month. That's a fun fact. But more deeply, that a lot of people I spoke to talked about the inability to regulate their sleep patterns. They talked about ongoing anxiety, low-level, non-focused anxiety, restlessness, a feeling of being unfocused, untethered, out of control. So these aren't going to go away. So how can we counter these feelings, even in small and preferably non-medical ways, through our products and services and experiences to them, right? I think this is a real need. So what I would suggest when we think about these 5 areas post-COVID and we're moving into, it's not just which attitudes and behaviors are going to stick and which are going to fade away, but more importantly, which are the ones that are going to remain but are invisible, and that will continue to silently shape values, life strategies, desires, and fears. Because if we can understand those, we can better understand and address the drivers and deliver new functional, emotional benefits that are suddenly very important to people because of the scars of the past year. And then what are the value propositions that seemed critical before that are now seen as irrelevant by customers? So this is a significant life event and it's never going to be over. So I think we need to recognize that customers, human beings, have a changed view of the world we live in, and that they have new needs that we need to address. And I think we just don't think of this as being over.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Rich, and bang on time. Well done for sticking to the 5 minutes. I know it's a
No pressure then.
broad topic. Yeah.
No, now you can kill it, Nikki. You can just take as much time as you want.
It's all yours. Okay, brilliant. Nikki, this is Nikki from Basher Franklin.
Hi. So to follow that, obviously I'm going to be focusing quite a lot on drawing from my experience pre-pandemic, but also in the last 12 months. And as you can imagine, working closely with the workplace sector, you can imagine it's been extremely volatile 12 months, from the office is dead to long live the office. So, you know, we have some interesting debates and webinars and articles spinning around our industry, as you can well imagine. The first thing I do want to say, and not to be controversial, but I do prefer the term next normal rather than new normal, because we're not just wiping the slate clean here and starting anew. A lot of the emerging trends that we've all been talking about across many industries were present pre-pandemic. I think what the pandemic has actually done is been a catalyst for propulsion of an acceleration of certain trends into the stratosphere of acceptance. One of that is technology, and this platform, which I'm sure, well, I was definitely the one person that would avoid this platform at any cost, and now it's on a daily basis, back to back, and to the point where now I'm video calling my great-grandma, well, not my great-grandma, but my grandma. But also I think agility was definitely there pre-pandemic, and we were all, you know, pretty much having blended lifestyles. So that isn't changing. I think what is really changing is the fact that we've embraced that, and that for me, the big globals are having to embrace that their workforce are now agile and want to be agile and will only be agile from this day forward. And once they accept that and understand that the behaviors of their talent, the talent war, you know, they have got to wake up to the fact that if they want to be a contender in this talent war to win the best and the elite and all the talent that they need to progress as businesses, I think they have to accept that they have to change the, you know, I'm talking about traditional ivory tower hierarchical kind of companies that actually have been shunning this agility, and presenteeism is the hero, right? I think we all know now, after 12 months, all levels of every business has been working in this way. What I found really interesting, Stuart, is when you were talking about experience and identity. This is a huge factor in what we do. And experience in the built environment is a huge draw and a huge point of difference to attracting talent for occupiers. When I'm working with real estate developers, it's very much about how can my property stand out? What can I offer as a point of difference? So experience in my world is a huge factor of design-led, and also beyond real estate. So it's beyond the physical space. So we have to talk to clients about what is it that we are creating here? What benefits does it have? And Basher Franklin, we really prioritize people first design. So that then comes into the identity. We do a lot on personalities and how people can interact with physical space. But in terms of the identity factor, for me, this year has been absolutely fantastic for the activist and the protest, and, you know, talking about, you know, we choose to challenge, we want gender equality, we want Black Lives Matter, inclusion and diversity across the whole of the society and across the world. This hasn't just been a local impact, and everybody has been there watching this happen, and this will no doubt shape how people are invested in social values. They've had no distraction from these moments. They've been completely immersed in these moments happening throughout the world, and it's been a very good distraction from COVID, right? So everybody's been jumping in 2 feet to kind of say, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to stand up and value. And from my world, that's a huge impact on what my clients have got to wake up and realize, because for the next generation coming through, Gen Z and beyond, these are going to be huge factors to how they align themselves with companies and global brands going forward. Philanthropy is going to be a huge factor in that kind of criteria as well. I'm trying to stay on time, Gemma, and I don't know when I started, but please can you tell me to shut up when I'm supposed to shut up? But I just
you're about time, so let's
okay, fine.
Concluding points.
Okay, so I just wanted to also, I mean, well-being, we all know, is a huge factor in workplace, and we've kind of touched on a lot of that. But the big surprise for me in this, which is why I wanted to get to it, was sustainability, because if there was ever a time that I'm actually being heard about sustainability, it's now. So my big surprise from this survey was that actually, do people actually really understand how to be sustainable? And do people really understand that the smallest things make a huge impact? But the one thing that I thought was interesting was the comment around the cheaper alternatives because of obviously financial and economical impacts. But I think what would be really great, and I'd love more points of view in the discussion on this, is I'm a big campaigner for why is sustainable more expensive? You know, if we actually invested more in sustainability and it became a mass option rather than the elite option, we'd then have more money for research and development, and that whole cycle of making sustainable choices the choice, and actually the non-sustainable choices should be the expensive ones because it is costing us the earth, right? So I think just wanted to make that point. Now I'm done. 5 minutes. It wasn't as professional as you, Rich, but blah, 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 blah.
Fantastic, great. Okay, so let's open up.
Thumbs up.
Yeah, we've got 5-7 minutes for questions. I'm going to keep it relatively sharp. For those people with cameras on, I think I'm going to pick a couple. You know, I guess invite you forward to switch your cameras off. Sorry, switch your cameras on. Switch your mics on and come forward with questions. We're a small group, so we can probably vocalize.
And we're all very friendly. We won't bite.
Very friendly. And if you don't come forward, I'll stop picking on you.
Hey, I know that you'd pick on me straight away, Gemma.
Get in there first.
I loved, yeah, brilliant insights, and thank you all for taking part in this and delivering them to us. But Nicola, I loved your point about sustainability being that premium option. Stuart and Rich as well, and a point you mentioned about kind of hyper individualism. Is there a point there or a trend that we're actually seeing people being more communal rather than two individual, like hyper individuals, that actually, in terms of historically, communities have been able to somewhat bulk buy as such different segments of their lives together, and therefore sustainability was far more increased back then than it is maybe today. Just a point, or any thoughts that you had on that?
I mean, I would just say that I think it's interesting the way you position that, Luke, as hyper individuality. I think that, you know, we've often thought about there's this movement towards very young millennials and Gen Z to see themselves as markets of one. And partly, again, they've been programmed by corporations to give up all this data with the continued promises of personalized services, high touch relationships. And of course, it never happens. But now they have this expectation that you should know who I am and you should be able to create a solution for me. Now, I think that's different than necessarily being selfish. I think, you know, it could, you know, sometimes it might be the same, but I think it's more seeing themselves as an economic agent in that way. But we also know people subscribe to overlapping tribes. So their tribe might also be about something that is a much more communal, about collaborative approaches to healing the world, you know, psychically and physically, whatever it might be. So I don't think those things necessarily are in opposition. It's more like how they relate to each other.
I also think on that point that the kind of quote "together we are stronger" is absolutely so true, especially when we're dealing with a lot of these kind of topics that we're talking about. And the sustainability side, when everybody had an allotment and they grew their own veg, it was a community coming together and actually being self-sufficient. Part of this pandemic element and part of what you guys have kind of presented this today is that that quality of life is that there's a desire, I think, through everyone, that we're not so time starved and that we can balance our time better and therefore have a better quality of life. And who knows, that might mean that communities will come together, use land that isn't being used for anything else. Heaven forbid that every bit of land has a house on it. And actually maybe communities can come together and be self-sufficient, have small holding. There's a little element of jumping back in the past to look forward, which often I kind of say, don't keep looking backwards to go forwards, let's just keep moving forwards. But sometimes there's some things that weren't wrong that have just disappeared without us kind of acknowledging that. So that's quite exciting in respect to the balance of quality of life that could come back, which I think is a positive.
Yeah, I mean, I just also answering Luke's kind of, I guess, provocation is that actually I think that culturally our differences as well. We're very much talking about the UK, we surveyed the UK, but I think we've seen responses looking quite different in other parts of the world. So, I mean, I think people's attitudes have changed during the course of the pandemic. So actually we ran our survey in September, but remember in March, there was a kind of big shift towards collective action, towards, really kind of galvanizing and solidifying, and kind of a lot of social policing that went alongside that. There was a kind of a sense of what was right collectively. And I think that hyper-individualism has potentially emerged during the course of the pandemic. And so there's potentially been a shift in behavior. And I'm because at the beginning of the pandemic, I was talking about, love localism and collective action, and now we're talking about hyper individualism. So there's something in that dynamic. And I think I agree with Rich, they're not necessarily opposed. They're just kind of working in tandem, kind of pulling against each other and kind of working together. And elsewhere in other parts of the world, there has been a very different response, less of a hyper-individualism and more of a protection of other, actually. And so I think it's just interesting how our survey has potentially also revealed or put a mirror to what it is to be British, potentially, as well as obviously, this kind of emerging sense of identity and personhood emerging from a pandemic. More questions?
I had a question that was about privilege. Do you see anything, you see the social activism or people having the time to observe all of these things and be increasingly interested in it, and the social responsibility that we saw in the beginning of the pandemic? And I'm just wondering if like a lot of that focuses on all the disadvantaged groups, whether they are Black Lives Matter or Sarah Everard or any number of things in between. Do you have any insight to, are the people of privilege starting to get interested in tackling the privilege? So men in the gender conversation or white people in the race conversation, etc.
In my world, I'd love that.
Me too. You and me both.
I'd be like there with a placard. Yeah, absolutely. But
we're part of the change. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
The three of us should get together.
Yeah, together with force. In reality, I think we're going to watch it closely. I think it's something that hasn't quite yet paved a way.
Okay.
I'll be really honest, I'm not sure how that will settle, because we, like I said, we've been very focused on the haves and the have-nots, and they've been the main stories of this last 12 months, and it's been fantastic because it's completely opened up that discussion, which a lot of the time was behind closed doors or brushed under the carpet, or it was a textbook tick in the box, where I think now it's more meaningful and purposeful. How that then settles in terms of within multiple industries, but also within the media, because let's face it, even global media does impact us quite a lot. I don't know. Maybe Rich, maybe
it's really open for leadership, is what that's
yeah,
told.
I think it is to do with leadership, and we are seeing a shift from, you know, generational shift in leadership, and maybe that, you know, shift to Generation X, who were, you know, what the generation of possible original activists. Maybe there will be some galvanization from there and move us forward, which would be amazing. But I think every generation that comes after that is just as powerful.
Okay, final reflections.
I was just going to say on that question of privilege, I think that's such a naughty one, but I do think if it can be reframed as enlightened self-interest, because otherwise, you know, what is it? I saw something the other day that people of privilege see equality as unfair. You know, so until you can really reframe the conversation, because a lot of what's happening now is very much an emotional attacking at people that look like me. And you have to realize it's not about having a dialogue. It's about, this is someone's moment to get a bunch of stuff off their chest. And that's just the reality of the situation. So, you know, I think we go through these phases, and maybe it will change, and maybe we'll move on to a different kind of mode of interacting around it. But right now, I think rightfully people have a lot of anger to get out.
Yeah, and it's about you know, individuals saying, I don't need more. You know, let's see if I can hand some of my privilege over. But that takes a lot of strength, right? You know, everyone is, you know, battles to get to the position they're in. So everyone would argue that they would deserve it. So yeah, there's a lot of reframing that needs to happen. Any final thoughts and questions? Christina, I see you're wide-eyed. I don't know whether you have a question to ask.
No. I mean, I had some thoughts, but it's maybe a little bit much for the very last thing. I'm just really interested in what Rich was saying about this kind of lost time and with Generation X. And I'm so interested in these. I just think it's going to widen the wealth gap and widen the race gap. I mean, if your school's online, people who have more supportive families are inherently going to learn more than they already did. People whose families speak English are already going, you know, are going to be at advantages versus the immigrants or the immigrant experience. Or where I grew up, a lot of people would send their children to kindergarten to learn English. A lot of them were Mexican immigrants. And I just think all of these people who already had a disadvantage are just being pushed further and further back, while, you know, protest culture is trying to enlighten society simultaneously. So I think that tension is really interesting, particularly in relation to kind of the education system moving online.
Perfect. Yeah. Sounds great. I think we're just at the beginning of a conversation, aren't we? But quite a different one. So let's wrap up.
Sorry.
No.
Stuart, have you got any last thoughts, or shall we just wrap up?
I think listening to everyone and getting their different viewpoints has been really interesting.
Yeah, it's been great.
Everyone for attending.
Yeah, and we are just to say we have recorded the session. We didn't. I didn't say at the beginning, but we have recorded. So if you've got any, hopefully that's okay with everyone. But just to make that very clear, because we will circulate this to those people who couldn't attend and to others who are interested after this call. So fantastic. Thank you, guys. It's Stuart. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, brilliant. If you've got any questions or want to reach out for the full report, just get in touch with me, and I can pass on messages to the others who've been part of this call if you want to contact them as well. All right, thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye. Thanks for organizing. Bye.
See you.